Hello everyone. As I only can hope that you are seeing my slides, because I haven't been able to try this Zoom out yet. But
yes,
good afternoon,
works.
everyone.
It works.
Yeah.
It works good.
Thank you. Okay. So then, good afternoon, everyone. If you haven't been already on some sessions, welcome to this electronic online conference. And in this talk, first of all, my name is Domagoj Jakobovic. I come from the University of Zagreb in Croatia. I will be presenting the work, the joint work with my colleagues and myself, considering modeling behaviors of attackers and defenders in the network environments. So let me begin. Our motivation here is that the problem of modeling attacker behavior and attacker possibilities in network systems is a complex problem that is usually solved and tried to be modeled with different simulators. So we rely on simulations to see how vulnerable our network is and what kinds of attacks is it susceptible to. Now the problem is that, of course, most existing simulations and simulators often don't represent the whole reality and the whole choice of parameters and system properties that are prevalent in some network system, and of course that is not possible to do in the general case. However, what is mostly done today is that network operators commonly employ static defense strategies. A notable example is a moving target defense, where the defender just introduces random changes into the network topology in the hope of delaying or preventing an attacker from gaining control to nodes in the network. So we are asking, are random static defense strategies actually a answer, and are they able to cope with an adaptive attacker, the one that could possibly learn? So the goals of what means to evaluate both attack and defense strategies to not previous behaviors, both on the attacker but also on the defender side. And we aim to find strategies tailored that can be tailored to specific network parameters for different types of services, or parameters that a network operator might value over others. So those are our goals. How do we get there? Well, in a few items. First of all, we propose a new simulator that is based on coevolutionary algorithms, and we are able to optimize simultaneously strategies for both attackers and the defenders, or we can opt to optimize just one side at one time. Furthermore, the simulator can take into account what we call a normal network traffic. That is to say, we impose an important constraint on the defender's side that he can be prevented to disrupt the normal network operation while at the same time trying to cope with possible attacks. Additionally, we propose and also optimize a new metric that describes the amount of changes that the defender is introducing in the network, and that makes it possible to guide the defender strategy. And finally, we add a temporal component in the simulation in the concept of turns. Both the attacker and the defender exchange a number of turns, a number of games, and we evaluate their position and the current state of the network after each turn. And a single simulation, a single game against the attacker and the defender is simulated and evaluated in a number of turns. So actually, the rest of the slides describe the current simulator model and the results we are able to obtain. So what we are simulating is a network, and the network can be represented with a graph. Network elements are the regular nodes or hosts, and we consider a node any element in the network that offers any kind of a service. For instance, anything that users can hook on and get some result from. A special type of node is a firewall node, which is able to separate the network into two or more subnetworks. The idea behind the firewall is from the attacker's point of view, the attacker cannot access nodes which are behind a firewall from his point of view. And he's able to do that only after a successful exploit is mounted on a firewall. Only then he's able to pass the firewall and access the rest of the network. Each host bears a set of resources. At least one resource is available at every host. For instance, that can be just an operating system for running the tasks, or any service that the users can connect to. These resources are accessible through ports that serve as communication endpoints. So each assigned port identifies a specific service. Hosts are, of course, connected, and they can be connected with either undirected or directed connections, and this is in our model defined with an adjacency matrix. We have another special type of a host, which is a honeypot, which functionally behaves as any other host, but it is not accessed by legitimate users, and the honeypot nodes are actually used to immediately identify attackers, because if anyone is accessing a honeypot node, it can be immediately identified as an attacker, so intrusion detection. To model different types of resources in the network, we have a property of resource popularity, which is used to populate multiple hosts with different resources, and it is used to generate multiple random networks and multiple hosts within a network. For instance, some resource might be present on many hosts, some resources present on relatively smaller number of hosts. Additionally, we have a resource similarity relation between resources, which models the probability of a successful attack, which, if it is mounted on one resource, if another resource bears a high resource similarity, then the other resource can also, with a high probability, can be exploited with the same attack. And this way, we can model different risk levels for each resource. Functionally speaking, host, and each host is modeled as a set of resources available on the host, set of ports available on the host, and with two flags, two booleans, which say whether the host is a firewall or whether the host is a honeypot. And this is the environment in which the attacker and defender are playing with. So we have two players in this simulation. How are they evaluated? To evaluate both the attacker and the defender, each player performs a sequence of actions on the network. The actions are defined later in the presentation. Each action is associated with a certain cost, which is a simulator parameter, so that no one can do an infinite number of actions. And to determine how many of actions are possible in a single move, the players perform actions within the allotted budget, which is also a simulated parameter. And finally, when the budget of a single player is depleted, then the other player takes turn. And players exchange turns, where each turn is called a single game. They perform actions until budget is depleted, and then the number of games can be repeated. And this evaluation is run in several games, which we used 5 in our simulation. So this is actually the process evaluate one attacker against one defender. They each exchange turns. In each turn, they perform actions within our budget, and just then we evaluate how good one or the other are. What the players can do? We have a special platform, and his possibility assume that the attacker already controls with firewall from his point of view, and he doesn't know the resources which are allocated to each host or which port used for the resources. But he can perform scan actions to find those information, and he can try to run remote exploits, exploited, although with different success rates, with different probabilities. So the attacker can perform either a scan action or he can attempt an exploit. But each of these actions has different subtypes. Within the scan, he can choose two types of scan: a horizontal scan, which just scans a group of accessible nodes, but for a single given port among the set of available ports. And he can choose to perform a vertical scan where a single node is scanned for all available ports on that host. The cost of these actions is modeled with two parameters. We have the cost of accessing a single node, and additionally, a cost of scanning a single port. So by combination of these factors, we can impose a realistic cost of those actions. Additionally, he can attempt an exploit either on the previously scanned host, in which case it just attacks the observed resource on that host with the maximum vulnerability, or the attacker can attempt exploit on a previously unscanned host, in which case he doesn't know whether that resource is existing at all on the host. So that attack may or may not be successful, but he can choose to attack the resource which he observed is the most popular, which is the maximize strategy, or just select a random resource, which is a diversified strategy on unscanned hosts. So this is for the attacker side and his possible actions. On the other hand, on the other side, we have the defender, whose goal is to prevent the attacker from mounting exploits, or at least to slow the attacker down. But in the same time, the defender has to maintain the normal operation of the network, which in our model reflects as not being able to remove certain subset of the network, certain subset of nodes, or their corresponding connections that participate in the normal traffic. So we define what subset of nodes as a percentage or a specific nodes that must not be affected by the defender actions. The defender actions are basically adding or removing elements in the network. So he can add or remove a honeypot node, with users accessing the honeypot node are immediately labeled as attackers. There's a limit to the maximum number of those. He can add or remove a connection, which actually translates to rerouting traffic between hosts. He can add or remove a resource, which actually reflects to resource migration. And he can move ports, reassigning an existing resource to a different port on the node. All the defender actions are taken on a random part of the network, and of course the subset of protected nodes cannot be affected with his actions. So these are the players, these are their possibilities. How do we optimize their behavior? We need to encode them and then optimize them using evolutionary algorithm. Each player is encoded as an array of integer values in the scope of 0 to 100, where each value represents a relative probability of a specific action. Of course, values are scaled beforehand to sum up to 100%, and then the actions are performed until the budget is exhausted. So we only have relative probabilities for different actions. On the attacker side, we have 7 genes in total for actions and their subtypes. For both types of players, we first select an action, which for the attacker is either scan, exploit after scanning, or exploit an unscanned node. And then, depending on the selected action, we select additionally an action subtype. For instance, in the first gene of the attacker, there we can read the scan probability, say 15%. And if the scan action is chosen, then the genes 2 and 3 define whether it would be a horizontal or vertical scan. The fourth gene defines the probability of exploiting after scan. And the fifth gene defines the probability, relative probability of exploiting without scan. And then the further 2 genes decide whether it would be the diversify or the maximize strategy exploit. The same logic is used for the defender encoding, where we have 9 genes, 3 actions and their variants. The first gene denotes the add probability, this one denotes the fifth, the remove probability, and this one denotes the probability of moving a port. If, for instance, an add action is chosen, then these 3 genes decide whether it's going to be adding a path or a host or a resource. Of course, we have limitations to all of those, and this is generated in each term, in each action. Okay, so how do we play them against each other? Well, in our evolutionary model, we have two populations which are created at random. In the initialization phase, regardless of the scenario, we first evaluate each member of one population against every other member of the opposing population. In that way, we have an initial fitness for each of the players. And then in the evolution phase, we have the following options. We may choose either population to be static, to not evolve, and the other population to be adaptive, that is to perform evolution just on that single population. Or in the most general scenario, we can allow both populations to evolve. In that case, we have adaptive defenders and adaptive attackers. So only members of the adaptive population are subject to evolution. So we can evaluate static against adaptive and vice versa. So this is actually the scheme of things. From both populations, for a single evaluation, one member is selected from each population. They play a game in a number of turns, and then they both receive their simulated metric. So what actually we are? What are actually we optimizing? Of course, different population optimize different fitness functions. For the attacker population, the fitness function is relatively simple. We just maximize the number of successful exploits. But of course, the honeypots are not counted here, just the nodes that are not in that subset. So the fitness of the attacker is just the number of successful exploits he is able to mount. For the defender, we have a composite fitness measure made up of two components. The first component is described with our new measure as the network spatial topology, which actually defines the amount of changes in the network on both hosts and paths and the resources in discrete moments in our simulation after each turn, after each game. And the second component is just the minimization on the number of exploits that the attacker is able to mount. So this is actually the composite fitness measure of the defender. It is important to note that these fitness values are not commensurate. They are they are defined in different terms and in different units, so to say, but they can only be applied to a single population at a time. And we performed some simulations to show the functionality of the simulator. We experimented with different network sizes, for relatively small to, say, a larger network. We experimented with a different number of resources, different number of resources per the host. Initial network size is not always equal to the maximum network size, because the network can grow during the evolution and during each simulation. And to denote some costs for the attacker and the defender, we allot them a budget, which is initially the same, 15% of the initial network size, for instance. Cost for any defender action is 1, cost of accessing a node or accessing a port is 1 for the attacker side. It is important to note that these values, their costs and budgets, are completely arbitrary. They can be defined as needed to reflect any particular network or any particular estimate of a cost that the defender or the attacker might have. So, and these are the aggregate results for every simulation we did. We simulated different network sizes. We simulated 3 scenarios, with one side being static, other side being adaptive, or both sides being adaptive. For each scenario, we made 30 runs in 150 generations, where both population sizes were 30. And I highlighted the interesting part, because when you're looking at the fitness values, the exact magnitudes of these fitness values actually do not tell us much. But for instance, we can note this situation where when we have static defender population and adaptive attacker population, then we can note that, of course, the defense fitness is lower, okay, but we can immediately see that the standard deviation of the defense fitness is large, which actually means that the defenders are not able to cope well with different attack strategies. They are not robust because they achieve a very wide range of scores. The same situation can be seen in the opposite case, where we have adaptive defenders and static attackers. And in this case, in the attacker population, we have a large standard deviation and considerably smaller fitness values. Only, of course, when both populations are allowed to evolve, we may get what we could say are the real numbers or the real scenario. What can be observed from the simulation is that random strategies are not able to compete with the evolved ones, which is seen from the large fitness deviations. And on the other hand, the evolved strategies are able to adapt to different parameter choices, to say different sizes of the network or different number of adversaries, something like that. And it's relatively easy based on our results that an attacker is able to mount at least one exploit. So the defender should require a relatively larger budget for this to be amended. But of course, in our simulations, we just chose one set of parameters, which may or may not be relevant for a specific kind of network. But the point is, the network operator can choose the parameters and use the simulator to assess the vulnerability of the network. So where could this be used? This could be used either as the help in the design phase of the network to assess the network layout, to assess the future vulnerability of the network and the types of attacks it can withstand or not, or it can be used in dynamic conditions to help network operators do changes on the fly in the actual network while it's still running. Currently, our fitness functions are predefined, which should be parameterized or most generally defined entirely appropriately by the user. And currently the connectivity is relatively random. It of course has the number of weights, the number of connections as a parameter, but we should probably add usual communication patterns like hypercube, star ring, and the usual that can be found in different networks, just to generate a number of test cases. And so this would be the end of my presentation. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Domagoj. We are fine with time, a bit ahead of schedule. Clap, 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 clap. Yeah, clapping hands. You cannot hear it, but people are clapping at their homes.
Yeah,
right
I
now.
see some. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we may have time for a question, maybe. Maybe one, maybe two. So I encourage people just to unmute the microphone and make it directly. Not everyone at once.
I have a question.
Oh, hi, Luca.
Hi. Just a very practical question. How long does it take to evaluate the fitness function for this particular problem? I mean, how complex it is, the simulation that you need to do to evaluate a particular strategy?
Well, it mostly depends on the network size. For small networks, relatively, say, a few tens or hundreds of nodes, it could be done in, let's say, real time. But if we increase it to 1,000 nodes or so, then it takes really, really a lot of time. So you need at least several hours to get to some meaningful results. So yeah, the network size is what takes the most time.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, it's dependent linearly also on the size of the population. But we noted that the size of population does not result with different, much different fitness at the end, with much different results. So the heaviest component is the network size, actually.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, we are roughly 3, 4, 5 minutes ahead of the schedule. I think we are gonna pass to our next presenter. In any case, I remind you that today during the poster session, you can join the Jitsi meeting, and every chat, every talk has a specific link. So if you have more questions, well, you can ask in there. So thank you so much. Clapping hands again. And well, thank you.